Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here for episode 774 with Amii Barnard-Bahn. Amii has done a fantastic job of laying out specifically what it takes to be promotable. So you'll learn 1, the 5 elements of the Promotability Index, 2, 4 steps for developing strategic thinking, and 3, the 1 question to get the feedback you need. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or some bits that we reference here, please pay us a visit at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP774. And if you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, please check out some of our goodies, such as the Gold Nugget email list, which summarizes the actionable takeaways from Amii and all the conversations that we've had here. They come out on the day the episodes release. And when you subscribe, you also unlock the vault of all 774 of these summaries. That's the Gold Nuggets, one of many goodies over at awesomeatyourjob.com. And now, here's a bit about Amii. Amii is a former Fortune Global 50 executive and a current C-suite consultant to global companies like the Bank of the West, Adobe, and The Gap. She's been recognized by Forbes as one of the top coaches for legal and compliance executives. Amii also contributes to the Harvard Business Review, guest lectures at Stanford and UC Berkeley, and is a fellow at the Harvard Institute of Coaching. She speaks regularly on workplace culture, leadership effectiveness, and corporate governance. She is the creator of the Promotability Index and author of the companion PI Guidebook. Amii earned her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center and her BA from Tufts. Amii is a lifelong diversity advocate who testified for the successful passage of first laws in the U.S. requiring corporate boards to include women. Big thanks to Amii for sharing her wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, "If you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today." And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that. And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. Now, here's Amii. Amii, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I'm excited to talk about the Promotability Index. But first, I think we need to hear about your passion for opera.
Yeah, I love it. And it's been something I've missed quite a bit, as you can imagine, over the last 2 years. And I think it's kind of like heavy metal for grown-ups. So I would describe it for people who haven't maybe been exposed. It's a little bit of symphony. It's a little bit of ballet. It's a lot of singing. It's costumes. It's crazy plots and drama. It's got a little bit of everything. And it's usually over the top and has remarkable history for some of the older pieces, but there's a lot of new works that are being done. I'm on a board that specifically does a lot of really challenging, interesting, cool stuff in really unusual locations. So it's bringing opera to the masses. So that's been fun.
Oh, fun. And I've always wondered when it comes to opera, when they're in other languages, you still love it, or how does that work for you?
Two ways. One is super titles changed everything. They came in the 80s. And so I was just talking to a friend of mine who works at San Francisco Opera. I stayed with him this weekend, and he reminded me that when super titles, which were fought vociferously by all true artistes, or in the early days, and then fought equally by people who said, no, people don't understand what they're saying. This is impacting the performance. We need to make this accessible. Super titles won out, at least in the United States, and it changed everything for the performers. People started laughing at jokes. Mm-hmm. People started crying when people died. It was the singers were just blown away because they'd been used to performing and then polite clapping at the end. Mm-hmm. So it was remarkable in that sense. Some small houses may not always be able to afford them all over the world. So that's where I keep the caveat. Sometimes I've gone to the opera, or some opera houses are purists. They don't believe in them. And for me, that's almost like going to a foreign film and checking one part of my brain out for a little while and watching visually and just enjoying and figuring out what's happening without words, and understanding you don't actually always need words to know what's going on.
All right. Thank you. Well, now let's talk about the Promotability Index. You are the creator. Tell us, what is it? Who should use it? And how does it make things better?
Well, one of the healthiest things I think anybody can do for their career is to work on what's under your control. And so I created the Promotability Index based on all of my work as a former Fortune Global 50 executive, chief human resources executive, and attorney, and person who just kind of worked my way up to the top, and saw how people got promoted or fired or stuck or let go, and reverse engineered it into 5 key elements, which I'm happy to talk about. And so I created an assessment first, which anybody can take, and I made it free on my website. Accessibility to moving up the ladder is one of my values. And so it's an 82 question assessment that can let you know how you're doing on the 5 key elements. And then the 5 key elements are things that decision makers use when they look at promoting or elevating people to higher levels in the company, or who they're going to invest in as potential leaders. And so in my experience, the 5 key elements are self-awareness, external awareness, strategic thinking, executive presence, and thought leadership.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited to dig into each of these 5. Maybe to start, though, could you share, is there a particular finding in your work and putting this together that has been particularly surprising to folks in terms of, so that's a big deal, eh?
I think people underestimate external awareness the most. Mm-hmm. I wrote a Harvard Business Review article on it titled, "Promotions are not just about your credentials, they're about your relationships." Because there comes a point in time in everyone's career where their credentials, to a certain extent, become irrelevant. And I don't think we're told that very early on, certainly not when we're paying grad student loans, potentially. Mm-hmm. And it's really a ticket to the game. And it becomes about, can you work with people? Do they want to work with you? You may ace your job, but in terms of getting to the C-suite, it's going to depend on the mix of people, whether they trust and like and know you. And that can come as a real shock to some people around mid-career. And that's often where people get stuck.
Okay. Well, yeah, I want to hear about this. Okay. So, and can you share with us an example of someone who worked through some of the pieces of the Promotability Index and saw some really cool results from doing so?
Sure. Well, we know that promotions aren't always fair or rational. I'm sure you can think of a couple of examples in your own life and anyone on the call. And so, of course, you need to be good at what you do, but it's relationships and working with other people that are going to get you that promotion. So one client that I had about a year ago was an absolute rock star in terms of their performance in sales. And they were the number one salesperson of the year, which is a pretty objective criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Selling stuff, right? You can measure that. Some jobs are harder to measure in terms of what you accomplished and your goals, but sales is pretty straightforward. This person was not getting promoted, and they had been there several years and was getting very frustrated at this. And after working together for about 6 months in coaching, part of what I found out was that 2 levels up, my client was being blocked for promotion because of a perception that he was a lone wolf and that he needed to be the star. And so all of his hard work that he was always putting in every day, day after day, just going out there, getting the client, hitting the numbers, that actually was getting to a point where it was working against him because he wasn't demonstrating in terms of external awareness. People were not seeing the other side of him, that he was a good mentor, that he cared about people, that he could lead a team, that he could achieve through others. So once I found out that that was the perception of him, we started working on those things, and he showed up very, very differently. And it wasn't easy for him because he'd worked really hard to get where he'd gotten. And to quote Marshall, what got you here won't get you there. So the same behaviors that made him very successful as an independent contributor were holding him back from moving forward.
Right. Well, and I'm curious then, how does one get that gem of an insight that, hey, a couple levels above you, this is the perception of you? Like, I mean, did you just sort of go ask around? And what do you recommend for individuals who don't have a coach to do that work for them?
It's a great question because I think he would have left.
Mm-hmm.
He was very close to leaving, and he was a superstar, so that would have been a loss for the company. 360 reviews are what they're commonly called, and it is going and asking around is the casual way to put it. It's confidential, and coaches or your internal HR department may do it. And you get perceptions and themes together. And that is how I found that out for him, or he would not have known. Mm-hmm. People don't, unfortunately, feel comfortable giving people the feedback they need to improve most of the time.
That is true.
It's very easy to say, oh, you did a great job, Pete, on that. That was awesome. Mm-hmm. It's harder if it's like, well, Pete, can I talk to you for a minute about how that meeting went? Mm-hmm. Got some feedback for you. You may or may not be open to that. If they may not want an argument, they may not have the time. They may fear conflict.
Yeah.
They may not be very talented at giving feedback in a way that others can hear it. They may be too blunt, right? Mm-hmm. You may not trust them, even if it's true. There's so many things that can go wrong with feedback. So having a trained coach or HR person can be great. But I'll tell you my number one tip, if you don't have a coach, that you can get feedback that can help you if you think you're stuck or if you just want to get better at your job. My number one tip is to ask your boss and or a couple of other colleagues that are close to you that you trust, that will be direct with you, especially people that will be direct. Ask them, what's one thing I can do to be more effective in my job? Mm-hmm. And just wait. The trick is to stay silent and not to say anything. And 99% of the time, people will say, well, thank you for asking. Let me think for a minute. They'll say, well, one thing could be, this. You're being very specific and you're not asking them for the moon. So that's where people get in trouble. So they say, hey, how can I be better? It's too vague. So if you're really, really specific, usually people will pick one thing. It might be a little thing. Like in that meeting, you could have talked louder.
Okay.
I couldn't hear you sometimes. Or you seem to not like X person and it's stressful for the rest of us in the meeting. We don't even know if it's true that you don't, but I don't know if you're aware, but you act a certain way with this, and that can be helpful feedback. The trick is not to get defensive, mm-hmm. to thank the person for the feedback so that you can get it again, and then to act on it and circle back ideally and say, hey, thanks so much for that feedback. I've been working on it, and I'd love to know if you've noticed. So if you could catch me doing good, that's great. If you catch me slipping back, privately tell me. That could really help me. I'd appreciate it. So that's a great example if you're a leader for your direct reports. Mm-hmm. When my leaders have started doing this, it's opened up more of a speak up atmosphere where people feel more comfortable being vulnerable and getting better together.
Yeah.
It can be a real bonding experience.
Absolutely. That brings back memories at Bain. I remember, we all have our professional development plans, and it's like, oh, hey, here's what I'm working on, and I shared that with them. And then the manager said, okay, cool, and here's what I'm working on. And it was like,
isn't that great?
What? Like, this is eye-opening.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool, thank you. And it really does. It sets that vibe in a real positive way.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, so then, can you tell us the genesis of the Promotability Index? And when I hear the word index, I start thinking about research and validity. And do you have any of that stuff to share as well?
I wanted to engage the creative and the positive side of development, having been forced to use many, many types of instruments as an HR person and an employee. I found that most of them sucked all the joy out of career development, which should be an exciting thing. What do I want to create? Who do I want to be? What do I want to learn? Right? Think of yourself as a 5-year-old kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And getting excited about learning new skills. And okay, I'm not so good at this, but that's okay. I'm not going to hang my entire ego on that. I'm going to work on this kind of thing. So I did not make it a psychometric, Harvard validated assessment because I think there are plenty out there and I use those in my practice. I wanted something that was easy for anybody to use and that simultaneously, simply by considering and contemplating the question, raised the consciousness of people reading it that, oh, that's something that should be on my radar. That's something that people grade you on, even if they're not telling you that. A lot of promotions, and having been in the room where it happens, it's not obvious always who gets promoted and why. And so I wanted to create greater access. I wanted to create a language that managers who otherwise might have difficulty actually pinpointing what it is that's holding the person back. Sometimes managers just don't, they know it when they see it, but they don't know how to articulate it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to help with that as well.
I find that's often true when I'm looking at writing. It's like, this is good, this is bad, but why?
Yeah.
And I really have to think for a while and it's like, oh, okay. Strong and white, elements of style. These sentences are just kind of too long. They don't need to be like that. Just kind of clunky and less clear. Or we're using some vague language. I'd like to make that a little bit more real, in terms of, or that's not interesting or exciting. I don't think anyone cares about that thing. We need to hook it into what people are really after and what they value. And so, but you're right. It takes a lot of time sometimes for me to articulate why is something good or bad, or why is someone promotable or not promotable. And I got a kick out of doing it, the 5 categories, and then up to 82 sort of yes or no responses. It's like, oh, maybe I don't actually read news associated with my industry all that regularly. Huh. How about that? I mean, I learn a lot of stuff from a lot of people, but I mean, it's somewhat rare that I pull out the Association of Talent Development's report on such and such, and that'd probably be a good thing to do, and in order for me to be promoted. Although I guess if I'm the owner, promotion more so looks like my listeners and customers say, this guy is super awesome, we should pay him more, or
right,
hire him more, refer him more, or whatever.
It's written around Fortune 500 companies, since that's where I cut my teeth. And I've heard, in my pilot testing, and thousands of people have taken it now, even independent contractors or people who don't manage others, that's another thing that's assumed in there. I just said, well, just ignore those questions. My whole point is don't get caught up in the score. And that's why I made it 82 and not 100. I didn't want our little weird brains from college to be like, is that an A? Is that a B? Like, no. I did a little scoring just to hijack the part of ourselves that is competitive with ourselves. But the whole idea is to be competitive with yourself. And the guidebook, the companion guidebook to the assessment, which I only wrote after clients asked me to, they said, this is great. Now what? What else do you have? And I said, what do you mean? Just work on the stuff that you didn't check, whatever, move towards what brings you joy. Like what's exciting to you, like that you didn't check, that you're like, oh, maybe I should be doing that. Maybe I should speak at my professional association events. Maybe I have something to say or write about. And some people wanted a book. So I wrote the book, and that's been out now for exactly 1 year. And that's been fun. And that's generated a number of conversations and given a lot of companies and groups that have adopted it, a common language for this. The ideal way to do it, I think, because in the performance review process can be really painful because most of it's a backwards look, right? Most of it's, do you get a raise? Am I getting a promotion? How much money are you giving me? And what did you think of the work that I did? Well, that's all backwards. This is all intended to be, again, the creative look forwards around who do I want to be? Where do I wish I was better? What jobs are exciting to me now? I believe in a growth mindset and that we can continually be learning and continually are changing in terms of what our priorities, desires, needs might be. And so this is designed to kind of be a designer, choose your own adventure kind of a book. With your manager is a powerful way to do it, because if you can sit down and say, hey, these are the 5 things I think I could work on. They might say, actually, I think you're really good at that. That's happened too. There have been some amazing conversations. I had a colleague who adopted it, her case studies on my website for her credit union, and a young woman had taken it and said, I don't want to get promoted. And about a third of the people that have taken it so far don't want to be promoted, which is another great thing to know, because then you just need to say, okay, how do I give them lateral assignments? How do I keep them engaged, right? As a manager, it's really helpful to know that, as opposed to people who do want to get promoted and might leave if they don't feel like they're moving forward. Different needs, different people. And this young woman came back a week later and said, I thought about it, and I decided after taking the Promotability Index that I had never thought about it before. I'm the first one in my family to go to college. Like, I just already felt like I'd made it. I'm so lucky to have this job. But if you think I can do better, I'd be interested. And they got into this wonderful, beautiful conversation about, she said, yeah, I would completely support you. You need to do this. You need to work on this. And let's do it together. Let's bite off a chunk every year.
That's cool. Beautiful. All right, well, let's cover it in a bit more depth here, the 5 elements. And could you give us perhaps a definition and maybe a top tip for boosting it? So let's roll through them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so for self-awareness, it's around knowing your why, knowing your how, knowing your what, really why you do what you do, how you show up, and what makes you special in terms of what you bring to the party at your organization. And so it means knowing your values, motivators, and preferences. It would be a more technical way to describe it. Usually when a tip I would give you for self-awareness is if you're unhappy or unsettled in your work, it's often because your values are being challenged or are under stress. Now, big picture, that can mean a mismatch with the organization. Smaller picture, it could mean a conversation you had recently, a decision that's been made by the company that you don't agree with. But it's helpful to know your values and think about it in that way and say, oh, okay, this is why I'm feeling the way I do. And that's just helpful because you may have the power to change it. You may realize it's a really big deal and it actually is a deal breaker for you, and you might need to make some changes. So that's one on self-awareness, Pete, that I would share.
Mm-hmm. And so any perspectives on the finest ways to zero in on what one's core values are?
Well, I use these deep assessments that get to it really quickly. If you don't have that, I would think about what brings you joy, what brings you pain, how do you make your decisions? There are plenty of lists actually on the internet around these things. There's usually about 33. Strength Finders is a very common one that's used by some companies that can be very helpful. And I believe they have a free version where you can get your top 10. And that can be a really good start.
And tell us, if we do have the access or the budget, what are the deep assessments you love?
The one that I like best is the Hogan assessment. And it's work related, and it's been around for a very, very long time. And we leverage it in coaching to, let's say there's something we find that your boss is saying, you need to work on this. And it's not something that you're really that motivated to do, like public speaking. Let's say he says, I want you to present the next board report. And that's just not something that just, you'd rather kill yourself than do that. We would look at your motivators. And for example, let's say you had a motivator for great performance. You're a high achiever. We'd say, okay, Pete, I know you don't like this, but this is something that you need to do to achieve high performance. Your boss has basically said that. Let's leverage your value there, high performance, that you're high performing, high achieving. And then we'll figure out how we're going to get there. But that would be your motivator to get around, I don't want to.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, how about executive presence?
Executive presence has been thrown around a lot. And I love a definition by Kokwal that they created based on a study, actually, that divides executive presence up into 3 elements. The first element is gravitas, which is grace under pressure. It's one way of defining that. The second is presentation skills and communication. And the third is appearance. And they found that 70% of executive presence could be attributed to gravitas, meaning that you have some backbone, you take a stand when you need to, you're calm in an emergency, people come to you for guidance and advice. For presentations and communication skills, that was about 20%. So being able to present well, to speak well, and enunciate, good eye contact, all those good things, no quirks or tics when you're presenting that kind of thing. Ideally getting rid of those, depending on your abilities. And then the last being appearance. Appearance surprises people at being only 10%. And I would say appearance has a dwindling impact. I think when you first meet someone, appearance can be very impactful. It can either make or break a first impression. But as we know, appearances can also be deceiving. And so over time, it fades. And I think gravitas and presentation skills and communication come to the forefront much more so.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a favorite approach to improving one's gravitas?
Well, we find out the triggers that are preventing people from staying calm and centered in the times that they need them to be. There's usually a pattern. And so we keep an acknowledgement journal of what's happened over the prior week or 2 weeks. What's triggering it? Is it a person? Is it an issue? There's usually circumstances or things that are happening around that time that are making you stressed and that then trigger you to act a certain way, which could be withdrawal, could be aggression, could be a number of reactions, could be caving when you really need to be taking a stand, right? Things that may not serve you in the long run as a leader, depending on what the situation is. So once we figure out what the triggers are and you're aware of them, then you can start making an active choice to choose differently and to choose what you know is the right thing to do. And it just takes practice.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about gravitas. If someone, caving or freaking out, could you maybe give us a demonstration of a high gravitas and low gravitas response to, let's say that I am requesting budget for an important initiative and they've told me no, and I want it bad and it's genuinely important and I'm willing to take a stand for it. So low gravitas, it sounds like you could be caving like, oh, okay. Or flipping out like, this is ridiculous. What are you thinking? So what would be a high gravitas response?
You'd have your facts together. You'd already have your business case, right, to begin with, to make the request. But you would say, I appreciate costs are at an all-time high. I appreciate that we're looking at everything. I'd like to reiterate that the reason for this request is X and the benefits to the organization are Y. And it's very important because if we don't do this, then the cost will be Z and we'll be actually paying more next year for the same thing if we don't make that choice now.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
That would be an example. You stay in your rational brain. You've done your homework. I am assuming that already, which wasn't in this hypo, and you go back to your facts and you, especially for a cost, an ask of a cost for money or a raise. I have some videos on this. It's very important how you ask, and you need to have your ducks in a row and you need to have your data. You need to have thought it through, and you need to have thought it through from the perspective of the person that you're asking. And if you want the highest likelihood of getting a yes.
Mm-hmm. And so then the thinking then is, in terms of promotability, that sort of persistence is not an annoyance. That would be a knock on promotability. Like, oh, Amy's just not a team player. She just won't let it go. But rather it is a pro in terms of, Amy's really got this gravitas.
Right. And you still may get a no, but you've just hit on exactly, you want to be thinking about what feeling. I always tell people this for critical conversations, start with the meeting's over. You're walking out of the room. What do people think of you? What perception are you leaving behind? Because that's what's most critical as a leader and will determine your future success as much as anything. And if the perception is, oh, what a hothead, or oh, they don't understand how this business works. They have no idea how we are just losing money hand over fist right now. Have they heard of the war? Have they heard of COVID? There's so many things that can go on in the room after you leave. You want them to say, okay, well, that was a well-measured request. They did their research. They understand the financial situation and the crunch that we're in. I'll give them some snaps because they still went for it, even though we said no, and they handled it with grace. And I won't mind having that conversation with them the next time.
All right. Well, now let's hear about the next area, strategic thinking.
Strategic thinking is an interesting one because I found through my career that it's the hardest one to get without getting experience. So it's like when I first tried to get my first retail job and they said, well, you have to have experience in retail. And I was like, but no one will give me that first job. Strategic thinking is the same way. You need to have a certain amount of responsibility before and access to all the pieces of the puzzle in the business to be able to think strategically, to understand how, if you take this piece out, how that affects these other pieces, almost like a puzzle, right? So what I advise people for promotability is what's really critical and what I've seen is you need to be able to demonstrate to decision makers that you are a strategic thinker. And the ways that you do that are visibly asking questions that are smart, but not obnoxious questions. No one wants to show off, but show that you've done your research. There's a way to ask a question and there's a way to ask a question that demonstrates that you've been thinking, that you've been reading up on your industry, that you have been maybe talking to others in your field, and that you know what is important and kind of what's hot now. That's why I always advise people as well, and this gets into thought leadership, which is one of the other ones, but thought leadership can help you with strategic thinking. I don't know if you want to jump to that one too, but
Well, yes.
Strategic thinking. Some people ask questions and they're facepalm questions in a room. We used to all be in a room together. They'd ask a question that just by asking the question on its own, you could tell they'd not done their research.
Why don't we just go viral?
Right.
Or can you give us some examples?
Yeah. Or that they haven't been talking to their peers, that they only care about their little silo, that they're asking for X, and it's clearly it's going to affect IT or HR or supply chain. And they didn't have the meeting before the meeting to say, hey, is this cool with you? I'm going to propose this. I know this impacts you guys. Do you have the resources to help us? Or what are you seeing? Is this a good idea? This is what we'd like to do in marketing. We'd like to market this. Is this okay? And, have you checked it with legal before bringing it to the board? That's a classic one for like a new drug or clinical trial stuff, that kind of thing. And some of the bio firms that I work with. So checking in and demonstrating that you have seen the whole system, you've talked to the system, or you're aware of the system and anything that could go sideways or impact it, or that needs to be considered before you make a proposal, make a comment, question a colleague. That can make or break also not only how you're viewed as a strategic thinker, but relationships, which overlie everything that you and I have been talking about today.
And so then, I guess if you're just getting started with the strategic thinking, what do you recommend as some of the first steps? It's like, I don't even know what I don't know.
And that is where everybody starts.
It would not have occurred to me to ask about the legal stuff. And so, I don't know, is there like a book like Strategy 101 or just sort of like a process, like, okay, here's your org chart. Let's think about finance. Let's think about marketing. Let's think about legal. Or how would you recommend we get started?
There are books. There are 10 million books on every business topic out there. But in terms of just how to start in a grassroots way, number one, just know how you make your money, how your business makes your money. Number two, understand how your function fits into that greater whole. so that you know what piece of that makes the engine run. Third, read up on your industry. Fourth, join professional associations, get involved, educate yourself, steep yourself in the issues of the day for your business, for your organization. Be ahead of the curve in terms of what's coming down. Many businesses are being impacted by AI. If yours is one of them, you should know that. And you should know whether that's a positive or a negative and what chain reaction that's expected to have 5-10 years from now. Talk to your boss, find out what they read. How do they stay up to date? Read your 10K if you're a publicly traded company. 10Ks have amazing information in there. If you're required to disclose to the SEC in terms of the litigation that is pending, in terms of any other disclosures that are required, super helpful. Before I joined a company, that was always part of my due diligence, and I'm amazed at employees and execs that don't necessarily always do that.
Or listen to the earnings calls if they're publicly traded.
Right? Oh yeah, amazing.
Sometimes, even when I'm an investor, sometimes there's a unique level of boredom that I get from listening to earnings calls. And I think maybe it's because that's just the medium in terms of it's not flashy TED Talks. It's, okay, let's dig into,
I think we can agree that they're quite dry, Pete.
Nonetheless, dry, but informative. Like, okay, this is what's really on the CEO's mind and the CFO's mind and the stuff that they're worried about and that the investors are caring about. So now you know. All right. And so then we talked a bit about the external awareness. Anything else you want to add there?
Gosh, the question I gave earlier is a good one for external awareness, that, what one thing could I do that would make me more effective in my job? Because when you're asking someone else that, then you're getting their perception of what would make you more effective at your job. You may not agree. You may think, that's a terrible idea, but you don't show it. There's your opportunity to show gravitas and executive presence. And you say, thank you. And at least you know that that's the perception they have of you. You may get some really great information from that, Pete. You might get information like, oh my gosh, they think my job is this, right? You might, but it's really this. I need to step it up. And how am I going to do that? What data do I give them? Where could they've gotten that impression? How often do I see them? Do I have enough time with them? Was it just one event? Did they hear it from someone else? Like, the advantage to a lot of this is if you understand perceptions. And as one of my sheroes, Carla Harris, says, perception is the co-pilot to reality. If you know perception, you have an opportunity to change it. If you don't know, it's sitting out there as a potential blind spot, and those can be landmines that can kill your career over the long term if there are enough of them.
Absolutely. Let's hear about thought leadership now.
Thought leadership is usually the last. If I had to put them in order, and they're overlapping, and they're each of the 5 key elements. But I would say that when people are the most senior in their careers is when they have, number one, the most that's most to say, that's particularly unique and interesting, and they have a little bit more time and more pressure to be unique, especially if they want to, say, go to a corporate board. I do a lot of work with corporate boards and board governance, and often after you finish an executive career, a great way to leverage your expertise is to serve on corporate boards after there's no conflict of interest potentially for your industry. So thought leadership, you can start with baby steps, though. You can start, again, by being involved in your associations, your organizations. They always need content, Pete. So writing for a journal, I've got 5 of them back here, that I write for in various legal and compliance and ethics and HR spheres. You can speak. They always need free content and speakers. You make great relationships that way, which are beneficial in terms of having a powerful network on so many levels. You can gain a mentor, you can gain a sponsor, you might find your next job. You might just find a great friend that loves what you do. So thought leadership is around being known for your expertise, both inside and outside your organization. Some organizations are restrictive and conservative with how much they will let you share outside the organizations. If you're in one of them, and those tend to be highly regulated organizations like healthcare, pharma companies, things like that, then look for opportunities inside to lead a project that may be outside your area, or to write for the intranet, or to be part of a white paper project on a potential initiative that's being proposed. Those are ways. But outside, if you don't have a lot of restrictions, there's so much you can do. As you know, it's never been easier to publish content. It costs nothing. You publish for free on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And many, many people have become famous and known for that. And that increases your promotability because others know of you. You build an audience, you build a following, more information comes to you. It's a generous terrarium, basically, that you're creating of information. If you're giving, inevitably you're also getting.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I found with contributing to organizations like that.
It's great. And we had a podcast guest, Kristen Burt, who she was in a completely different industry, but she had a passion for airline baggage, which is a unique passion. And she just started a blog, and I don't think there were very many on the subject. And so sure enough, I'm like, hey, here's the latest lost baggage statistics from the airlines. This airline's really made some improvements, probably based on their initiatives with XYZ. Da, 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 da. And so sure enough, that made her very distinctive when the opportunity finally arose for her to interview for such a role.
Nice.
And they're like,
nice.
Okay, well, nobody else has this. Yeah, you got the job.
That's great. That's a great story.
So it's powerful, even at more junior levels.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, tell me, anything else you really want to make sure to mention before we shift gears and hear about some of your favorite things?
Just that I think everyone has the potential, if they're willing to put in the work, to learn a new role, to get better at their existing role, to move ahead. And I hope that the Promotability Index has in some small way helped that. And there are a lot of other great resources out there as well. Not everyone has a mentor. Not everyone has a coach. Not everyone has a great boss or someone that's helped them along the way. And so I would just encourage people to go for it regardless, and to never assume that simply because you don't have a strong start that you can't get there. And we can think of many, many amazing entrepreneurs and successful people out there who have done it with nothing. And so I would just want to be really positive and optimistic for all of your listeners out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and not to squash positivity or optimism, but this does trigger something. If we're in an environment where it seems like our manager is toxic or severely dislikes us, or the forces of meritocracy aren't really operational, and that might be perception, it might be reality, I guess they're co-pilots. What do you recommend then? It's like, hey, I'm doing the work, I'm making progress, no one seems to care or notice. How do you think about when it's time to exit versus persevere?
I think it's a great question. I've talked about it on several shows as well recently with the Great Resignation. And I think that's when you decide whether you have the talk. And the talk, to me, depends on how financially comfortable you are with either taking a big risk or what your savings looks like. But having the talk is going to your manager and saying, or your leader, and saying, hey, I'd really like this promotion. What are the chances? What would I need to do? This is what I've been doing. I feel like I'm in sync, but I'm still not there yet. What would the timeline be? And if they can't really give you a committed answer, then you have to decide whether it's time to leave. Now, sometimes people may say, okay, I don't have quite so much money in the bank, so I'm going to eat crow for a year. And I'm going to job search while I'm doing this. Right now, over the past year at least, I don't know if the window's closing a bit, but with return to work, but there has been an unprecedented opportunity to have those conversations and to negotiate with the powers that be around what the timeline looks like, what the job looks like. If you love half your job and you don't like the other half, can you trade? Can you morph it? There's been a lot of great conversations that have been going on over the past year, I would say.
All right. Well, now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
Sure. My favorite quote would be from Peter Drucker, which is, you should not change yourself, but create yourself. That means build around your strengths and remove your bad habits.
All right. Thank you. And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
One recently, I'm always getting caught up in stuff that I then enjoy writing about. And one that I've been focused on lately is a study that we don't like people who deliver bad news.
Mm-hmm.
We all know it as to shoot the messenger, implicitly. But for someone like me who works in corporate governance, corporate ethics, healthy workplace cultures, the implications of that are pretty severe. And so I'm fascinated at how to reverse engineer delivering bad news so that to equip people who frequently have to deliver it so that they can be heard, so that better decisions can be made, so that people aren't afraid of speaking up, because unfortunately the universe is rife with situations and huge costs when people don't speak up when they need to, when they know something important. And so I'd like to try to help change that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And a favorite book?
The two that I'm sticking with right now are one called BS Leadership by my friend and colleague and Stanford professor Jeffrey Pfeffer, which is fascinating, and I wish I'd read it 20 years ago. And then in my fiction, I'm reading my favorite one, I think is with the greatest living authors, Joyce Carol Oates' The Accursed, which is based in Princeton at the turn of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm. And a favorite tool, so that you use to be awesome at your job?
I dictate constantly, both on my Mac and on my iPhone. And I have probably 1,000 draft emails right now sitting in my computer. They're snippets of ideas for articles, conversations, things I need to do, prep for your podcast, prep for clients next week, or a really cool article I read that I want to share. I love that. And then in terms of just a tool, I use ClickUp with my assistant and my team to manage all the different projects and things that we have going on all the time in the cloud. So that's been super helpful. That's been a game changer.
And when you say dictation, is there software you're using?
No, it's literally Apple. I just pushing the button on the Mac. It's the control button. You hit it twice. Mm-hmm. It starts typing out everything you say.
And you find that sufficiently accurate?
Enough. Mm-hmm. I go back and I have to watch sometimes. I can't speak too fast.
Yeah.
It's forced me to slow down a little. I can talk really fast. So it's punished me for that.
Oh, I hear you.
So I've had to slow down and be like, okay, I'm dictating now. I need to speak more slowly so it gets handled correctly.
Okay. And favorite habit?
Let's see. Work or life?
Work.
For work, I would say at the end of each day, writing down my intention for the following morning, and then closing my door and having the ritual of being finished with work.
Okay. And is there a key nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks? They quote it back to you often?
The one that we talked about already a little bit was that at a certain point, your credentials are irrelevant and that it's all about your relationships. That's been a game changer for a lot of people. And then the other one that I'll tell people that I think is important to keep in mind is that every job is temporary. And that if you think about it that way, you'll think about your career. It really opens up a different way of thinking, I think, about what you're doing day to day and what you want to be doing and where you want to be getting better and where you want to be focusing your precious attention.
Mm-hmm. And if folks want to get in touch or learn more, where would you point them?
They are welcome to find me on my website, which is barnardbahn.com, BARNARDBAHN.com, and also to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm on Twitter at Amii, BB.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yeah, I'd say get really good at receiving, giving, and acting on feedback.
All right. Amii, thank you. This has been a treat. I wish you much luck and fun.
Thank you. You too, Pete.
What I love so much about what Amii has to offer here is a lot of times the question of, hey, what do I need to do to get promoted? Doesn't get really clear answers. And when you go through that Promotability Index, I go, oh, I guess I'm not doing that or that or that. Oh, okay. And suddenly things become clearer. I particularly like the part about developing that strategic thinking and connecting your role to your team, to the organization's goals, and how so many things make so much more sense when you do that well. Again, the show notes, the transcript, and the links to items that we've mentioned are over at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP774. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full-text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.